Allison and the whole team. This always extraordinary work. So I'm just gonna do some closing comments. You know, there's the publisher, Simon & Schuster, has paid a lot of money to Homeboy Industries for me to write a third book. And the only thing, you know, I have to do now is, you know, is write it. So, because you know, we've already spent the money, so. And so but of course, you know, first things first, I have a title, and my agent hates it, my editor hates it, and the publisher at Simon & Schuster also hates it. So far, so good, you know. And it comes from a story that I may have mentioned before, but it's when I was testifying at a deportation hearing for a guy named David, who I'd known over the years, and he came with his mom when he was 9 from Uzbekistan, and he did a 10-year stretch in prison, so now they want to deport him. And when he came at 9, he got into a Latino gang here on the east side and tatted down, and I knew him in camps, probation camps in juvenile hall. And so now they wanted to deport him. They didn't. So when I came back from the federal building to the office, I see this guy Louis, who I knew was from the same gang as this guy David, and I said, "Do you know David?" And he goes, "Yeah, that's my dog right there, you know." He says, "We call him Russian Boy." And check this out. I was in a cell with him. He was in my cell at county jail. And every night he'd go out in the hallway and he'd talk on the payphone and he'd talk to his mom. And he spoke Russian. Damn, gee. He spoke the whole language. And so here's who I think you are. So the name of my book is called The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. And so, I gotta write it first. So here's who I think you are. All of you are mystics who seek to speak the whole language. Now the world has settled for half the language. As they say, I found out in Orlando, you don't know the half of it, you know? And that's the point. We settle for the half, and we're really invited to speak the whole language. So it's a fluency of tenderness. It's utterly essential in order to transform our world. For mysticism reorders things. This is why I think we're in a room full of mystics who are aligned in this movement that we find so hopeful. Because mysticism unsettles settled ideas. And that's what I think we're about, and that's how we leave these 2 days together. The whole language. So mysticism conquers fear, and kinship then becomes the hallmark of our mysticism. The exact opposite of this mystical kinship is the age in which we currently live. Division, the illusion of separation, tribalism, demonizing, suspicious, fearful, otherizing. And so as mystics, we're part of this, truthfully, this prison abolitionist movement. Because we imagine a world without prisons, and then we try to create that world. And that's why I think you've been here. I was in Rome during a kind of a brief sabbatical where I was trying to write this book that I didn't, and I did have some speaking gigs, and I went to an international school, young people from all over the world, but the language there was English, and so during the question and answer period, a young woman got up and there wasn't a trace of hostility in her question, and she was very poised, and she said, very kindly, why would you choose to work with gang members when you could help needy people? And I thought her question answered itself. And that's who we are as embracers of mystical kinship. We want to stand with the least likely to be included. Now, if you'll permit me to get a little theological here, in John's gospel, he talks about the sin of the world. And he doesn't talk about our sinfulness or, oh my gosh, so many sins. He's not talking about some puritanical purity code. He's not talking about 60s, sexual revolution. No. The sin of the world is the demonizing, is the otherizing, is the scapegoating. And this is who you choose to stand with. And that's a mystical campaign. That's a mystical connection. In Los Angeles right now, in LA County, they have a marketing campaign, I guess you'd call it, of the Department of Mental Health. And they have billboards all over the place. And it says, none of us are well until all of us are well. It's an invitation to know that we belong to each other and there's nobody who doesn't. There are no exceptions to that. And that demonizing is the opposite of who God is. But it's also the opposite of truth. And so none of us are well until all of us are well. And somehow that's a message of mystical kinship to which we're all aligned. And it addresses that singular sin in the world that forgets that we belong to each other. Also, in the original covenantal relationship between God and God's people, God says, as I have loved you, so must you have a particular preferential care and love for the widow, orphan, and the stranger, because God thinks these are the folks who know what it's like to have been cut off. And because they have suffered in exactly this way, God suggests to us that these are the people who are our trustworthy guides to lead us to mystical kinship. Widow, orphan, and stranger doesn't connect to us in our modern ears, but in its day it meant the society was saying, we can live without you. And you can supply heroin addict and homeless and gang member. And these happen to be our trustworthy guides to lead the rest of us to where we need to go. At Homeboy, we don't say that we believe you can change. We say we believe you can heal. And there's a difference. As folks were saying eloquently, the trainees, about it's not about changing who you are. Who you are is exactly what God had in mind. But discovering that truth is everything. And I texted him, son, I love you, you're my son, I've known you forever. I'm not going to give you money because I will always help you, but I will only help you. You need to go to rehab. And I know you've burned every bridge with your family and your friends. You'll never burn this bridge. I'll always be there for you. He texts me back, fuck your bridge. And welcome to my life. And as Stevie said this morning, progress. So often we ask folks in certain programs, to measure up. And when people need to just be invited to heal up, the bridge guy went to rehab eventually, but at Homeboy, as Inez says, we don't check boxes, we check pulses. And so when we speak half the language, we punish people for their bad behavior, and we call it justice. But real justice restores by loving people into their wholeness. And to those barricaded behind the walls of their own shame, we know, this room knows, that only tenderness can scale those walls. And so we choose to live in the soul, inhabiting the tender fragrance of love. Or as George Nunez, one of our homie security guards, says, every time he walks into Homeboy, he says, there's an aroma here. It is the fragrance of love. Mystics replace fear with love, vindictiveness with open-hearted kindness, envy with supportive affection. And we are all trying to feel located in the goodness of our own hearts, our soul finding its home right here. And that's what you've all chosen to do. That's what this movement is about. And this is why you are mystics. Our mysticism opens the heart, which is a constant deciding to be tender in the moment. I took two homies with me to go to Chicago. Larry, an African-American gang member who had spent half his life in prison, and Jose, a Latino gang member who had spent half his life in prison. And they were from rival gangs, and because they had just come out of prison, they were still, steeped in that notion that the races stay separate. And so there was very little conversating happening on our drive to LAX, as I recall. And then we were in line, Southwest Airlines, it's like the A, so I fly, so I'm in the Chingon section, the A-17 or something, and then the other two, Jose and Larry, are kind of next to me, I guess, but they're in the other line. And in what the homies might call a loud-ass voice, Jose says, "Hey, G, can I turn my phone to airplane mode?" I said, "Well, son, you don't need to do it yet. I mean, you can text, you can call now. You can even do it on the plane, but once they close that doors, you have to turn your phone to airplane mode." And he turned to a total stranger and he says, "I've never done airplane mode before." And the look on the lady's face was great, yeah. And as I thought about it later, he was inviting us both to live in the infinite moment where everything happens. Everything flows from our own chosen mysticism, from the soul's deepest sense of things, deciding to be tender in the moment that's right in front of us. So we gave a bunch of talks in Chicago, Larry and Jose and myself, and then where's the Loyola University people? Yes, from the medical school. So we spoke there, because I think it was after that I deposited the two of them at Navy Pier so I could go home and take a nap, and I said, buy stuff, and I gave them some fatty, and I said, buy stuff for your women, your wives and such, and your kids. Well, they came back and they had found one of those Build-A-Bear thing, where I don't know, you buy a teddy bear and they make it to your specifications or something, and you can record a saying on it in your own voice. So they both did this, and when they came back to the hotel, Jose was, watch this, and he pushes the paw on the bear, and the bear says, to give to his wife, "I love you with all my heart, baby." come here, give me a kiss. And he said, do you think she'll like it? I said, are you kidding? She's going to love it. But then the next day, he's forcing this thing into his kind of little duffel bag. And every 2 minutes, every time he puts it down, I love you with all my heart, baby. Going through the TSA conveyor belt, I love you with all my heart, baby. Shoving that thing into the overhead compartment. Come here, give me a kiss. We were crying, we were laughing so hard. So we came home and we went to LAX and we were driving back to Homeboy. And Jose's in the back seat and he says, "That was the best 4 days of my whole life." You know what the best part was, Gene? I said, "No, what?" He reaches up and he grabs the arm of Larry and he says, "Being with him." And Larry turns back and says, "Yep, I agree." And the enemy is someone whose story you do not know. And this reverence softens how we see things, and it leads us to cherishing, which is the mystical commitment of all of you in this room. So sometime after that trip, Jose came into my office and he said, I just found out that my father died. And it turns out he hadn't talked to him or seen him in 20 years. But he had gotten word his father had been deported many years ago. And he heard that he was dying of cancer. So he found a phone and called him and talked to him. He hadn't seen him in 20 years because when he and his twin brother were 11 years old, they made a pact. They said, when our father comes home tonight and he's drunk and he wants to beat on our mom, let's defend her. And they shook on it. And predictably, he came home and he was drunk and he started to beat on his wife. And the two little guys flew into action. They jumped on his back, they pulled him to the ground, they wrestled him to the ground, and the father, startled, kind of came to, and then he commenced to beat these two twin boys and then carried them out to the street and threw them on the ground and said, "You are dead to me. Do not ever come back here." And so they didn't, and they lived in a park down the block. And Jose told me that every night he and his brother, they'd pull out the garbage bag out of a garbage can and tilt it, and the two of them would slide in there and sleep in each other's arms. And then they got into gangs and sold drugs to survive, and he spent half his life in prison. His brother's still there. So he calls his father after 20 years, and he's telling me this in the office, and he says, "I just called him to tell him I forgive him. I don't want to carry that around anymore." And his eyes fill with tears, and one of them escapes and rolls down his cheek. And then he shifts gears. He says, "You know, I'm enjoying the person I've become here at Homeboy. Like I've never enjoyed anything before." Enjoy, it's an odd word to use. It's a right this second word. It's a risen life word. As homie Miguel Lugo said to me once, speaking of Homeboy, "I see flowers bloom here." That's right. Structures can't change until we surrender to the mystical. It is how things transform. All of us, we seek relational wholeness. We receive the tender glance from each other, and then we extend the tender glance beyond us. And it leads us all to a softening in love and the widening of a circle, to the scapegoated and the demonized. Mystics offer a radiant and attractive witness of kinship. Why would you choose to work with gang members when you could help needy people? They are our trustworthy guides. So mystics dedicate themselves to the readiness, the capacity, and willingness to stay in relationships. To stay in relationship is to say to the other, I will allow you to reach me. It's not about reaching gang members. It's about allowing ourselves to be reached. To alter my heart and transform me. Or as the Mayans say, I am the other you, you are the other me. We are made for loving. We wither away otherwise. Indeed, it's true that the measure of our love is to love without measure. And so we're always on the lookout for the hidden wholeness that's been there all along. Buddha nature, unshakable goodness. We help each other find our way home to have full and free access to our own undeniable goodness. Our essential dignity is never in question, only our access to it. In our network, it is never about choosing, it's about finding. If damaged people damage people, and if traumatized people cause trauma, then people who have experienced love and tenderness will extend that into the world. We believe, all of us, that cherished people will cherish people. And in this, we all inhabit our own mystical dignity. So this is the truth of who you are as we leave our time together. You are mystics, and you have chosen to speak the whole language. Don't stop. May you continue to be fluent in extravagant tenderness. And we'll see you next year, and register early. Thank you very much.